Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another of our series of managing your business, your small business through the pandemic webinar. This is number 31, started in this very room here, what I like to call the studio here at 17th and 8th Street in downtown, the Mid-State Development Building. And started here with number 1, and we're back for number 31. It's great to be back home. And got a good webinar, I think. Got new information on the PPP. We have a new interim final rule. We have also a new form to go over. We have options to look at. Lots to go over there. We're back in the red and feeling good about having a substantial problem rather than a widespread problem. So if you have any questions today, what we're going to do is we're going to have you go to the question and answer box and go there, and that's where we'll address today's questions, and we'll do that at the end of the day. So I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the CSU Small Business Development Center, and we've been here, as I say, for 31 weeks now, and we're going to be here for as long as we think that you guys need us. So let's move on. So we're part of America's SBDC, which is in all 50 states. And being in all 50 states basically gives you about 56 different programs across the country. Our program is located in the central part of California, the Central California region. And as you see, it's 14 counties going from the southern part of Kern up to the northern part of Mono County to the Pacific Ocean and all the way over to the Nevada state line. So in this area, we have SBDC services that are provided by a number of centers in the San Joaquin Valley. And you will find us, of course, downtown Bakersfield at 1631 17th Street. You'll find a center covering the Fresno area in Clovis. You'll find a center in Merced, Modesto, and also in Salinas and at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Have any problems, any questions? Feel free to basically reach out and talk to somebody about it. So today, really, I think I'm really excited about today because we really haven't had any guidance from the SBA since August the 11th. And August the 11th, we had a little bit of guidance, and we have our new interim final rule today, a new form, and a lot to discuss, but we couldn't be here without our sponsors. And we're really grateful for the number of sponsors that we have and that we have been fortunate to have them along for the entire ride, and that being Kern County, California, the CSU BPA, or the School of Business and Public Administration, of course, Mid-State Development Corporation, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, Blue Tech Valley Program, a great little innovation ag program out of Fresno State. And also we are powered by SBA. So that brings us to October 14th. Who would have thought we would have got already to October 14th? Hard to believe. So what's new today? Well, we do have a new tier. We really kind of got into this new tier system about 5 weeks ago and have been updating it on a weekly basis. We're going to look at that and look at the tier change from purple to red, and then also look at what it's going to take to get us to orange. Mention the new IFR and the new SBA FAQ. We now have 3 PPP forgiveness forms, and we'll try to analyze those 3 forms and see which one is best for you. Haven't talked much about stimulus for a while, and probably not going to talk much about it today. But we are going to talk about your questions. When you have them, please go to the Q&A box. And also, we're going to have a little bit of a poll today. So let's go up here and go into our poll and launch the first poll. And as many of you that listen on a fairly frequent basis know that we've been asking questions related to the Federal Independent Business Federation. They've come out with a great survey, and we've been kind of mimicking some of their questions. This was one that kind of slipped through the crack on us from their last load, so let's try this. If you applied for the PPP, how satisfied are you with the program overall? I'm very satisfied. I'm satisfied, I'm somewhat satisfied, and I'm not satisfied. Gives you 4 choices. And for those of you that have the PPP, this is a great opportunity to jump in and express your satisfaction level. So we're seeing the top 3 get a pretty fair representation of all of them in the 30s. Keep voting. We're up to about 57%. We have nobody who's not satisfied yet. So there's your cue. But very satisfied, and somewhat satisfied are kind of rounding it out. You got 62% of you voted right now. We're going to give you just another second or two, and then we're going to close the poll. And let's do that now in the poll and share the results with you. And if you applied for the PPP, 35% of you are very satisfied, 33% are satisfied, and 31% somewhat satisfied. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to share with you the actual poll that the FBIA actually had. And that is right here on this slide. And you'll see right there that well, I can't do anything right now. It's covering my screen. Okay, well, let's try this. Try to go with a no share. Close that, and go back. And coming back here, the NFIB survey had 31% very satisfied, 45% satisfied, and 20% somewhat satisfied. So pretty similar. I guess we're a little more satisfied here in Kern County and Central California than other regions, but very satisfied, number 1. So good to know. We have another poll question that I'm going to wait on a little bit and kind of bring it in a little bit later after we've had a chance to go through all of our forms and everything. But let's kind of go and look around and see what's going on with a lot of the tiers and a lot of the other things going on. So great news, big newspaper article today, front page, we're in the red tier. So being in the red tier, what does that do for us? Well, that actually will give us a lot of better options for opening many of our businesses, and we'll discuss that in a second. But here is the statewide map, and we're going to view Kern County specifically right now. And you see that we had 5.7 as our new COVID cases per 1,000. Now, this is the area where we're running into problems and why we weren't open two weeks ago in the red, is our adjusted case gets a increased factor of 1.1% because we're only hitting 75% of the median for testing. So you know what I say, if you have symptoms, or in many cases, my friends are telling me, even if they don't have symptoms, get yourself tested. You could be asymptomatic and not even show symptoms, and it's a good way to find out. Testing is free. It's available in a lot of other places. Then we also have the positivity rate of 5.3%. We basically talked briefly about the health equity metric, and the health equity metric that I'm just kind of going to wait and fold that in another couple of weeks after I even understand it a little better. But what it's taking is it's taking census tracts within your county. So within Kern County, it goes into what they consider the less healthy census tracts. Now, less healthy could mean lower income. I don't know the exact definition of what they're using, but it is less healthy. And they're actually looking at that as a means of everybody getting tested. Now, you'll remember about 5 weeks ago, we had Jay Tamsey from the Hispanic Chamber on, and they were working with the Latino task force that was set up to address the COVID-19 issue and the huge problem in the Latino community here in Kern County. So Jay has been very active with the task force, and they have at least a few scheduled free testing sites. There's a lot of them online. Get yourself tested. If you have any, I've been tested 6 times now, all negative. I think now instead of the Zoom cocktail party, it's the tailgate drive-through COVID-19 testing. And maybe that's what it takes to get us to the next level, to get us to the orange and get us into a moderate listing. But still pretty positive. Throughout the state, we saw where they had basically 10 counties that actually received a lower level. So it's only trending statewide, not only here in Kern County, but throughout the San Joaquin Valley. And also a couple of counties in the Bay Area, Santa Clara and Alameda, went to orange. So moving in the right direction. And so what does all this mean? So switching over to our tiers again and looking at widespread and what is open and what is not open, you'll see a lot of these sectors are open already with modifications. Where you really start to get into it is into when we start with retail. So we start with retail, and retail now can increase to a 50% max. Shopping centers, malls, strip centers, destinations, swap meets, etc., can go to 50% as well. Nail salons were open with modifications. They still are, but you're now starting to see some of the attractions that we've been missing. Our museums, zoos and aquariums, where appropriate, are also open now to a 25% capacity. It's kind of big for movie theaters that were really in the news a lot this week with AMC, one of the largest movie theaters by screens, announcing that they plan on running out of cash by the end of this year at the way their current burn rate is going. So it's probably welcoming news for them here in Kern County and elsewhere, where maybe movie theaters are going to actually now open. Places of worship, you can now worship inside. A couple of the bigger ones down here that really have affected businesses so much, and that's in the hospitality industry with hotels and lodging. You can see that they only changes they're allowed to now increase their fitness center by 10%. With gyms and fitness centers now, your gym can open at a 10% capacity. Getting to that next tier would increase that by 25%. So that's big in gyms and fitness centers. Restaurants who, especially the dine-ins, which have been really devastated, our small business restaurants with dine-in have really been impacted. They can now officially open 25%. And getting to the next tier would open them 50%, which would be really beneficial. Still outdoors only for wineries, and also bars and breweries, distilleries are still pretty much closed. But again, that's where no meal is served. And without having a meal provided, you really kind of missed out. And that's where you maybe need to get creative on bringing in meals, either by bringing in and having something either catered, a box lunch or something, which is available, or a mobile food vendor of some kind, a truck or a trailer or whatever. And I know I've already seen several of those examples where bars have got pretty creative in order in having food where they didn't really have it before. But that's something to keep in mind. And as long as also our family centers, card rooms, offices are still remote in most cases, disregard me today. And then also professional sports, of course. So that's kind of the good news about our tiers opening and getting to only a substantial problem with COVID instead of widespread. Now, the next thing is to try to move to moderate. Now, the key thing to get to moderate is that we have to stay in the red for 3 weeks. So the very earliest we can actually move to the moderate level will be on election day, since this is updated on Tuesday at noon each time. So good news, good work. And remember, you can regress. We can go back, which we do not want to do, back to purple. So it's imperative that we still kind of keep our guard up as we're able to open up a little bit more into what we can do, continue to be safe, continue to get tested, and continue to support your small businesses that have been struggling. Okay, so there's our statewide report. Let's go over here to the county basis and look and see what's going on here. A little alarming, we had 9 new Kern County deaths, brings that total to 406. A very devastating total, obviously, and one that hopefully will be the next story that we can talk about how it's improved. in hearing a report recently from Supervisor Zach Scribner, the ICU beds and total rooms available in Kern County, there's nearly 1,000 total rooms that are available, and there's quite a bit of capacity also in ICU. We can get rid of kind of that problem right there. That would be great, wouldn't it? Still a lot of sadness and tragedy going on with this. So we're up to 33,000 cases. I always tend to look at this 56 new, because really, and it gets adjusted and it varies from day to day, but really where we need to be is somewhere around 40 new cases a day to move into the next level, into the next tier. But again, we can't do that for 3 weeks, and we need 2 weeks of being basically less than 3.9 on both of those meters. So continuing to move in the right direction, of course, except for the fatalities. Okay, so a little bit about what's going on locally here. What are some of the other things that are happening? Well, let's go and let's start in Mono County. Mono County, one of our 3 counties we serve proudly. And Mono has got their, that's Mono and that's Cure. And really try to Google that one time and see what you get. You're gonna get a disease. And you almost have to put County of Mono, C.U.R.E. to pull it up, but it's there. And what's there is about $200,000 in support through Mono County's CARES Act funding allocation. And they're making a small grant, and the grant period and cycle is open right now. The grants are right here. They have they have a number of different regulations. They can go up to $10,000. Your business cannot generate more than $2 million in gross sales and gross revenues, and a variety of other factors. So there's a lot of eligibility. The key thing I want you to know right here is that the date that this closes is on October 20th. So we will not have a webinar again for me to remind you that next Tuesday, October 20th at midnight is when this thing's going to end. So get in for a Mono Cure, and if you're in the unincorporated areas of Mono County, if you're in the township of Mammoth Lakes, you are not eligible. But if you're in any of the communities in this fine map up here, going up to the top in Colville and Walker and Bridgeport, if you get into Levining and June Lake, all those regions are open and ready to go. Okay, locally right here, we have the B-CARES program. And B-CARES is the grant program that's open, and a number of requirements, a little bit larger businesses, annual revenues for businesses located in the city of Bakersfield that would like to apply for their grant program is $5 million. So it's based on the number of full-time employees, full-time equivalent, excuse me. So we've talked enough about full-time equivalents, and I'm sure it's going to come up later today. I think you're getting the full-time equivalents down. 1 to 5 can yield you 5,000 in this grant program, up to 10, 10,000, 17, 15,000, and if you're between 18 and 25, $20,000 is available. So applicants that have not received either the CARES or the Kern Recovers program, their small business relief program will be given a priority. They have preference. And so those that have really not benefited from anything, and I know that there's a lot of businesses in here, the website is in English and Spanish. So please let our small businesses know, and some of the reasons why they might have been declined, particularly those in the Latino community, I don't believe are factors with this funding. So B-CARES is out there, it's going, and a good program. So I think the city of Wasco has a program. I'm going to check into that and get back with you, but I think there's a number of little cities and other communities that kind of slip past the radar of the SBDC. So we hope to have more information on those as we continue to move along. If you're located outside of the tremendous throw of the CSUB SBDC, contact your local center and they should be able to provide you with information on what is being done locally. Okay, let's go back to some slides. So again, really close on that. I'm impressed. I was really concerned about that PPP poll because I thought that the satisfaction level might have been diminishing, and these numbers are from about 8 weeks ago. So they're a little bit dated, and people I think are getting frustrated with that. We did talk about Mono cures, so let's get into the PPP forgiveness update. Allocated a lot of time for this topic for the rest of today's webinar, so have your questions ready. Let's get into this stuff and let's go. So, the SBA has started to actually pay and approve forgiveness for loans under $2 million. 96,000 applications that had been arrived since the SBA portal opened back on August the 8th. Had been sitting there for approximately until just about a week ago. And so now with sufficient guidance and direction, SBA is starting to approve. So last week we had 12% of the audience that had already filed for forgiveness. So if you're one of those, then hopefully you've heard back from the bank, and feel free to throw it in the chat, and maybe we can look at that at the end of the webinar. If you have already applied and heard back from SBA on a forgiveness or from your bank, please put that, go to the chat and just put it in there. You don't have to put the specifics, just maybe the date line and the timeline of how it happened. But we'd be interested to hear your feedback. So 96,000 applications, hopefully those are getting approved right now. The one thing that we really learned also on this was that if there ever gets to be a second PPP, which since it has bipartisan support, it's just caught up in the politics, is that the forgiveness for your PPP1, your first, is mandatory. So if I'm in a hospitality and a restaurant type business, I'm thinking about forgiveness and getting it going right now, because you're going to want that forgiveness from the first one in order to apply once there is a second one. And it could be next week or it could be next year, but there's likely to be a second PPP for those businesses that have been significantly and severely impacted. So we did mention, and in mentioning a little of this last week, that there were still bills in the House and the Senate for a blanket forgiveness to 150. But then what we got is we got this instead. We got this come out from the SBA Treasury Department, and it's actually an IFR, an interim final rule. These interim final rules have been coming since, I believe, the end of March, right after the program initiated, or maybe into early April, and provided additional guidance from the SBA and Treasury on not only guidance for borrowers, but guidance for lenders. So in this particular guidance, and this was added to the SBA PPP FAQ on question number 52, and the question had to do with extended the deferral period for borrowers' payments, principals, interest, and fees on PPP. You'll recall that the Flexibility Act back on June 5th of 2020, the Flexibility Act, what it did was it extended for 10 months at the end of the forgiveness covered period the length of time where those fees, principal, interest, and others were not to be collected. So before that, the deferral period was 6 months. So in setting that up, lenders and borrowers, are they required to modify a promissory note for the PPP to reflect the extended deferral period? Most of you know, setting that up a little bit, that when you got your PPP loan, it came with either a bank form or the SBA form that most banks and lenders used. Some used an alternative that they used from their bank, but with that, what it did have was a period of time, a deferral period after 6 months of their covered period is when those would start accruing. And So the question is, do they have to come back and do they have to do a actual modified promissory note? And SBA does not require a formal modification to the promissory note. So probably a good news for lenders where they don't have to go in and modify all of those notes, but some of them might be modifying them anyway if you have a payment or you have an amount that is not forgiven. And that is because you recall back on June 5th with the Flexibility Act, the other thing it did as far as the term is it actually extended out from 2 years to 5 years the length of time that you had to repay the amount that was not forgiven. Now, it comes down to the individual lender, and some lenders are participating and some are not. Some are saying, gee, we'd really planned to get these off our books in 2 years, and we need to stick with that original agreement. Many others are saying, sure, we'll give you 5 years for the unforgiven portion. So there might be two reasons to modify the note there, not only the deferral, the 10 months, but also the change from 2 to 5 years. So that's our IFR, our interim final rule, question number 52, and the first one since August the 11th. So we were 2 months old, waiting for another bit of information on that. So thank you for that. Last week I shared with you our question of the week, and it asked if we could please review the PPP process for forgiveness, for the forgiveness form, of which there were forms then, but now there are forms +1. And some of the timelines and supplemental information. So that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time doing. So let's start with the timeline. So here's the timeline for forgiveness. So after you apply and you get the final decision from SBA, here's a breakdown of the schedule that you're going to see. You recall that as of June 5th with the Flexibility Act, you were increased the length of time to use the funds. You could go from 8 weeks to 24 weeks or till December 31st. Now, if you received one of the very last, toward the last, not the very last, but toward the end, and you received your PPP funds on August the 7th. August the 7th is significant because it's 168 days until December 31st. So the 24-week period is 168 days. If you received it from August 7th and earlier, you will not run past the end of the year. If you received the funds after that, then there could be a time in January, probably not February, but a time in January to where your 24 weeks could get squeezed down to maybe as little as 20 or 22 weeks. So that's the one thing. 24 weeks to use the funds or by December 31st, whichever's first. So then we also have the 10-month window now for you to submit your application. So you have 10 months from the end of your covered period to actually submit an application. If you don't, then the whole amount will not be forgiven and will be due and payable either in the 2 or 5 year term. The 10-month window for you to submit is kind of open now. And the one thing that's kind of unique about the 10-month window that I want to make sure I mention to you, and I think I have this up later also, but I just want to make sure we get this out. And that is, with the 10-month windows, you have a 24-week covered period. So a lot of banks, it's the bank's discretion on allowing you to go to the end of the 24 weeks, or they can allow you to actually cut it off after, say, week 12 or 13 when you've expended all your funds. The SBA has come out and said, yes, when you expend your funds, if you expend it early during the 24-week period, if your bank allows it, you can file for forgiveness then. So obviously that's going to affect your schedule. So 24 weeks to use the funds. A lot of lenders, this is one of the things that we get to a lot. Check with your lender, follow the guidance that your lender is providing. Your lender gave you this loan, your lender's your friend. Your lender is going to have different rules, and there's 5,000 plus different lenders. So stay in tune with either a website, email contact, or whatever, and try to stay up with the latest on information your lender is providing you. So then we have 60 days for the lender to verify your application. So if you were to get it in on Halloween of this year, the end of the month, then your lender would not have to submit it to SBA until December 31st. So keep that in mind too. And as lenders, we kind of move along, lenders are going to get more busy. Lenders were hoping for $150,000 exemption on not having to do forgiveness. We'll talk about what they got. And then it goes to SBA where they have 90 days to review it before they make a final decision. So in an example that I use a lot, my covered period ended on October 4th. If I get everything together and file on 10/31, and my lender takes the full 60 days at 12/31, then it could be March 31st of 2021 for the SBA to review and make a final decision on forgiveness. Now, we expect it to be faster and quicker, but the realities of the situation is there's going to be a lot of information that's really hitting at the same time. And if you recall from last week's webinar, we talked about how many different touches community lenders that were going through the forgiveness process were starting to see. And those touches between the lender and the borrower were between 4 and 6 times before they were able to submit. Now, that might have changed a lot this week with our SBA Form 3508S that we'll discuss. But that's the timeline, and that's the timeline we're going with, and that's what it is. Now, when I give advice to individuals that are doing this, my first one is to first look and try to identify which form to use. We're going to go through that today. We're going to look at all 3 forms in just a bit, and look at advantages, and then look at 3 situations that might fit all three different borrowers. Always look to see if your bank has a checklist, and regularly check and see if they're accepting PPP forgiveness, because there's still many lenders that are not. Double check your covered period and your alternative covered period. Very important that you have your dates and your timeline and everything down and correct. Verify your bank's process for actually going through the forgiveness. They could be using a third party. You could be using somebody at your local branch. Maybe you used an online lender and you'll be doing the process entirely online. And always make sure all your account numbers, dates, contact information, and all that fun stuff is correct. The last thing you want to do is, and I think we were kind of hoping and speculating earlier, that once you go through the forgiveness process, if there was an error or something, or you made a mistake or there was an issue, until we come out with more guidance, we were thinking that you could get the application back and resubmit. It seems now that it's going to be a one-time, one-shot deal. You submit the application, you're given a percentage of your forgiveness. Then, and this could be changed, I'm hoping it does, that there is some kind of process before it has to go to an appeal process. But right now, what I've read is right now, it's just from that to the appeal process. So please make sure everything is correct. Okay, so let's look at your 3 options, and we kind of went through that, enough of that anyway. So let's start with this form, Form EZ. And rather than go through the slides, let's go right to the forms. Okay, let's not. Okay, first of all, let's just glance real quickly at the EZ, because the EZ is going to be a 3-page form, and we're going to open it up, but we're also going to look at the C form, which is a 2-page form. So there's a couple of questions at the top of the form that allow you to differentiate between the forms. With EZ, they have a couple questions at the top, and then it jumps right into the form itself, and let's go there. Okay, I'm going to stop my share and give you something else to look at here, and that is well, we'll start here. Okay, so here's our first form. And this is what we like to call around here, around our office, as the whole enchilada. That is the 3508 form, 5 pages. It's the form that you will file if you cannot use the EZ or the S forms. So it's going to be your larger applications that run into issues with full-time equivalents. If you had a reduction in your full-time equivalents, or if you had a reduction in the number of hours that you provided them, and if you cannot use one of the safe harbors, then that will be the one that you get thrown into. So this is kind of the least desirable because it's the most time consuming, the most difficult. And also the main difference is right here, is these lines right here. Adjustments for full-time equivalents and salary reduction. So then it requires the calculation that gets into PPP Schedule A and requires a massive calculation on each individual employee to come up with that quotient in order to apply it to forgiveness. So again, this is if you don't hit any of the safe harbors, you don't have the people coming back, and also you meet the one guideline with the COVID guideline, COVID-19, that we'll look at again in just a moment. So that's the main part that's different between this form and the others. Those 3 things right there. The calculation for the full-time equivalent is very, very, well, it's very, very detailed. I'm not going to say it's very difficult, but it is not the easiest form in the world. This is something that you're going to see on all 3 of the forms, and it is something I really want to cover and really want to mention, and that is the certification of the borrower. So essentially, you're signing and saying under penalty of perjury that all of these are true, or this is true, that you basically used the funds correctly, that you did not use them unknowingly for an unauthorized purpose. Down here is borrower has accurately verified the payments for payroll and non-payroll costs, and into all of these. And I really think you need to spend a lot of time and make sure that you feel comfortable in signing all of this. The last one is the one that's kind of a little bit more telling because it's the safe harbor #1 exemption for FTE reduction. So, and really it kind of meets this one right here. Again, this is something I don't have a clear enough definition. Maybe if I went in and read this from the Secretary of Health, but if you look at the last half of this, this is where you can essentially check the box if your business was impacted by COVID. And it has to meet these definitions though. And if I use that exemption, I'd really want to know what the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the CDC Control and Prevention or Occupational Safety and Health Administration relate. And it has to do with sanitation, social distancing, but it doesn't say in there anything about the governor closing our businesses down. So that is the one which is the catch-all that gets you out of basically all 3 of the forms on that particular calculation. And the reason you want to get out of that calculation is because it requires that, but it really requires the Schedule A worksheet, which is the employees, their compensation, making sure you brought them back for enough hours, etc. So there are 2 safe harbors, which is safe harbor, exactly what it sounds like. It's a way for you to safely check the box and opt out of having to do that. But really look at that carefully and go over that in good detail. And then every one of the 3 forms, also the last page is going to be optional demographic information. And I encourage you to fill this out. I probably have said this many times by now. But one of the criticisms of this program is there wasn't enough of this type of demographic information required when the loans were initially made. And this now is an opportunity to catch up with that and to kind of go back and see, who was represented. Was it veterans, which gender, race, and ethnicity? So that'll be the last page on all three of the forms, but this is the one you get stuck with if you have nowhere else to go. And it's really this calculation on the PPP Schedule A worksheet that is going to be most time consuming and require most work in making sure that you kind of can get to 100% forgiveness if you spend all your money appropriately on payroll and retain that number of staff and didn't reduce their hours or were able to use the COVID reason we've talked about. So that's 3805, 5-pager. Now, if you remember back in about June, you were along for the ride then, the first form that came out was an 11-page form. And so this was essentially a short form. So the long form was once a short form, and now it's the long form, a 5-pager. So subsequent to that, what we've had is we've had 2 other forms come out. So actually we've had 3, because that was one that came out after the original 11-pager. So now you have the 3508 EZ, and the EZ came out to make it a little bit easier, a lot easier, and did a lot of the things they had, but you see what's missing in here is those FTE requirements. It's the Schedule A worksheet that we looked at. So that part of it is gone, those 3 lines. And it just goes with your payroll costs, your business and mortgage interest, rent and lease, business utility payments, and then gets into the amount if your payroll costs were at least 60%, and the other costs were in this line, then you were in good shape. Now, one of the things that we've talked about all along, and I wasn't sure was going to be the case with this one, or actually with the next Form S, is the idle advance. If you recall, on these forms, you are required to disclose your idle advance. You'll see it right there. Idle advance amount and your application number. So the idle advance was determined fairly early in the process that it was not going to be forgiven. And whereas the amount were advanced to you, if you received a PPP, it wasn't going to be forgiven. But so now what we're looking at with this EZ form, and soon when we go over the S form, is we're looking at a lot of people who are going to have maybe 100% forgiveness with the 24 weeks and the 60%, and a lot of the rules with the Flexibility Act that made it totally more flexible. But you're going to have an amount that's going to be unforgiven, and that's going to be your idle advance. And you're going to need to repay that over the 2 or 5 year term, depending on your lender. So back here, the EZ form ends up with just, again, basically the 3-page form gets into the certifications here, and they're going to be very similar. There's also a checklist that's available that can show you the difference between using this form and using the long form. Should get into that if we have time. So these certifications, again, are the same ones. Basically, you just need to go through. You are certifying in this one that you did not reduce your wages. The other ones, you're showing them with the form. But in the EZ form and then on the S, it doesn't even come into play. But here you are having to initial the fact that you did not reduce salaries or hourly employees by more than 25%. Okay? That's the big difference between this one and the last one. And your signature. And then the demographic information again. Okay, brings us to the new form, and we have a new form. It was a welcome sight. We were hoping that this would be 150,000 or less, and we didn't know exactly how it would play out, but we had been talking about a blanket exemption. I think this is the closest thing that we're going to see to blanket exemption. And it's really not just a blanket exemption. It's still going to require you to certify and to do other things that help alleviate the fraud problem. But with 50,000 and less, it eliminates a huge number of PPP forms. And what it's doing is if yours is 50,000 or less, it's pretty much starts off the same, but you still do have the EIDL advance. And so that will still need to be taken care of if you did receive one. The thing that's different here is it does ask the employees at the time of application and at the forgiveness application. But my understanding is even if this is a less number, you still get the forgiveness because of it actually goes through the process of actually doing that. Okay, so again, you're signing for some things. One of the things that you're going to sign for, there's an item we covered a lot, but always needs reminding, is that the maximum is that you can, as a self-employed individual, is you can claim it's 2.5 months of your 2019 compensation. And that is for any type of business anywhere and is capped at $20,833. And the $20,833 is if you elect the 24-week covered period. If you only elect 8 weeks, you're only allowed 8 weeks of that compensation or up to $15,385. And if it's less than 100,000, it's prorated down to the amount that's 2.5 times your compensation for 2019. So a number of the other, here we go again with the certifications, but look how it just jumps into the certification. The other thing that it doesn't really ask in a lot of cases is the forgiveness amount. So in the example that I'm going to show in a minute, hopefully we will be able to have that whole forgiveness amount there, EIDL advance, EIDL application, forgiveness, which will be separate, of course. So here are the certifications that you are, essentially saying you didn't commit fraud, you used the money squarely, you used it for what the program was intended for payroll, for mortgage insurance, for rent, for utilities, etc., and the demographic form. And that's the forms that we're going to look at. So now let's go jump into a few of these right here. And fortunately, I got rid of all those annoying tabs at the bottom of number 31, PPP by the numbers 31. Just really want to focus on a couple things this week. And a lot of it has to do with the 3 different scenarios that we'll get to. But the one thing I really wanted to point out that we mentioned earlier, and I thought I did have it in here somewhere, was your lender could require you to wait to the end of the 24-week covered period. So that might be an option for you to elect an 8-week period. When we looked at this one over time, we've looked at the difference between 8 and 24 weeks. Again, it's an election for you. You can choose 8 weeks. You can choose 24 weeks. You can complete it anywhere between the 8 and 24 weeks. Many lenders, most lenders maybe, you will be able to apply for forgiveness at that time. Check with your lender. So here are the reasons, and we'll just kind of go over that one in trying to get to that, because I really want to spend a little bit of time with our 3 different scenarios. And they're a little bit different. If you've seen the ones in the past, they're a little different this time. We've stuck, of course, with Kelly's Grill, which we've kind of used as our example, which is a dine-in restaurant with 15 full-time equivalents. We've added 2 other businesses. One of them is Fred's Pizza Delivery. And Fred's Pizza Delivery has 10 full-time equivalents. And then A&B Medical Labs. And tried to shake it up a little bit here with something a little bit different for you and really kind of show an essential business that is doing COVID lab work and testing and maybe even thriving during the pandemic on how this might affect them. So 3 different scenarios. We have one that's a restaurant that's been closed for a substantial amount of time in any county that has had the shutdown or most recently been in the purple. We have Fred's Pizza Delivery, which maybe had a little bit of a short time where they were impacted, but from what I've seen and talked to and experienced, pizza delivery is doing quite well, thank you. And then the A&B Labs, which is brings in the service type business that is actually doing the testing and is doing well. Now, this was their actual application to get their PPP loans in order to apply. It's pretty simple because if you know the PPP amount, you can almost back into some of these numbers, at least their payroll numbers. So when you tell people your PPP was $100,000, you could have some exclusions and you could have some owner's comp, but there's a payroll number that can be calculated out of that. So for these three scenarios, we have the first one is 100,000. And really, I'm going to try to just give you what my opinion would be on which form I would probably file with this particular business. So with Kelly's Grill, you'll see that $100,000, we have a number of employees. We use this tracking sheet. I didn't put the one that we had been working on and completed, but threw the tracking sheet in there for a couple of reasons, just kind of go back to. But came down to we actually had a PPP of 100,000. We met the requirements. Very high payroll was that requirement, and then some other expenses, but very high payroll and some other expenses. 100% of that $100,000 was a actual program cost allowable under the program. So in this particular venture, what I would think, if I'm filling this out, I'm looking at the EZ program. And I'm looking at the EZ program because I think that there's either two safe harbors that we can meet on full-time equivalence, and full-time equivalence is going to really drive the difference between the EZ form and the standard form. So in this one, I think I can go with the EZ because I'm pretty sure a restaurant that's dine-in that has been impacted like they have has met the requirements of the CDC and others, the fact that they couldn't even open, social distance, and others. That would be the fallback position. The first one could be during my period of tracking expenditures. I did reach my number of employees, and it's several times we did do that. So this one would probably, for my example, probably go with the EZ. Okay, now we have Fred's Pizza Delivery. And there's Fred's numbers and how he kind of broke it down. And one thing that's unique about Fred's example is Fred did not take his owner's compensation. He only received his PPP on his net income. And that's something we saw happen more often than we would have liked, but it was kind of the way the application process went. It might have been a new process at the lender, or some lenders just didn't have the appetite to bring the owners in, particularly on a Schedule C, particularly on the self-employed income for sole proprietors. So in going through these calculations, we come up with the 50,000. Now, the 50,000 and under will qualify for the new form we just went over, which was Form S. So in this example, even though the business has probably been doing good and probably met the full-time equivalence, they were not closed. They didn't really need to go after that exemption. You didn't really need it because you're 50,000 and under. So with 50,000 and under, it takes the full-time equivalent and the full-time reduction completely out of that part of the equation. Kind of what we were hoping for 150, but we got 50. The last example, A and B Labs, and then we'll go to questions. You see their revenue and a few things have been come on down to the bottom line. There is their $150,000 loan amount. Now, most likely this business got their 150. They were busy. They were working up to the end. They're probably still busy. So most likely they're going to meet the requirement on bringing their people back as far as the FTE. I would think that this will qualify. I'm not 100% sure on this one, but I'm pretty sure we could qualify if we looked at the checklist. We could qualify this under the EZ form. And that is because they did retain these 20 full-time employees at the end of their covered period. Okay? 3 examples, a little different. We were able to squeeze an S, an EZ, or an EZ out of that. That's the way I see it. And let's move on to your questions. Okay. Go there. Go back there if we can. And it just does not like me to do that. Okay, questions. Start right at the top. Can I fill out an application easy and have someone from SBDC review? I was told by my bank if I made a mistake, the SBA will reject my forgiveness. Yes, Edith, we are going to be doing that. We're just now starting to get ready to do that. Another thing we're thinking about adding is 1 day a week is just to have a little online, little informal. It's one that really you have to feel comfortable with being in a room with other people and talking about your financials. We'll see how that goes, but it just seems like a pretty good way to get a lot of questions answered in a shorter period of time. But yes, the SBDC is going to be working on the review process, and we have a few consultants that are getting up to speed on it now. Just a lot of it has been waiting for the final rules and the final examples, final forms, and everything else. I think I got this one on an early question on the loan forgiveness. The time period, I think we got that down as technically at the end of the covered period, you have 10 months. Question here is, when will Kern County get grants like LA area has for small businesses? And I think we saw that also in Mono County today, grants for small businesses and micro enterprise. There was grants for nonprofit businesses, but really most of the others have been in the form of a PPP style loan. There has been some talk that there could be some CARES Act money that comes back into the program. And that is something we'll keep you up on if, as we kind of develop. But right now, there's not grants in Kern County, but we do have the one for the city of Bakersfield. For the 20,833 limit for an owner employee, does include health insurance and retirement payments in addition, or just salary? And it will include all. It just will not include any employee payment, any copay for their health insurance, or likewise any additional contribution to a 401k plan for retirement. With offices being remote, what does that include? Anybody that works in an office anywhere? It is the guideline, and I think that offices where they have workers that are considered essential workers are no longer remote. It's kind of a case by case basis, and one that really hasn't been defined really well. With the new tier system being 4 or 5 weeks. I am in the office today in a red tier. Yes, owner compensation is capped at $2,833 for 24-week covered period. If the owner compensation was less than $100,000, it needs to be prorated down. Do we have an Excel spreadsheet that helps calculate all schedules and fills out the application? At this time, we do not. We've used it mostly as a learning tool, and kind of used it as a learning tool going forward, waiting for all of the forms. When other stuff becomes available, I know that there are other apps because I've been following them, but it's really getting to that point to where enough guidance and information is out there in order to provide that. Thank you, Carol, for letting me know that your forgiveness application has been approved. Yeah, this is a great question, Sheila. Thank you. The forgiveness application forms say they expire on 10/31/20. What will be used after that date? That caught my attention also the first time I saw the new form, because it was only essentially out for maybe 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks before it expired. And going back and looking at all forms, all of them have started at all of them have started to expire on 10/31/20. What will likely happen is that the form will come out a few days before that with maybe a new date, If not, I'm sure we'll get some information from SBA or Treasury on if they will continue to accept the forms that expire on 10/31/20. And that is all of the SBA 3508 forms, the long form, the easy, and the S. On the easy form, how would you fill out the form if 80% was used for payroll? Well, you can use 80% of it for payroll, and then if the other 20% that you have left, you have other costs such as rent, mortgage, insurance, utilities, etc., then you could use the other 20% for that fashion. I have an employee that was reduced 60% of normal hours related to COVID-19. Would that affect the filing for forgiveness? Well, there's a lot of different factors that could go into that. The employee could have been reduced by choice, by their own suggestion. It could have been a couple of other things as well that happened. And also, if it was under 50,000, it doesn't matter anymore. So if it was over 50,000, then you look at other factors. If you had people that left on unemployment, that's so there are actually reasons, good reasons. People could have been let go with cause after they were called back. So there could be reasons of why their normal hours weren't worked. It's just it's difficult to answer that with that information. Compensation from any source does not include Social Security or FICA. Okay. Full-time equivalents. Full-time equivalent, thank you. Sometimes I am a little negligent in giving the definition. A full-time equivalent is one full-time employee working 40 hours, or it could be two half-time employees working 20 hours a week. Those two people would actually equal one full-time employee equivalent. For the S form, do we reduce the forgiveness amount by the EIDL advance amount, or will the lender and SBA do that automatically? I'm under the belief that since it is listed there, you list your entire forgiveness amount. And then what you do is they see the EIDL advance amount, and then they will make the appropriate reflection in the amount that you still owe for the EIDL advance. What is the best course of action for business owners to express concerns regarding the inability to deduct expenses paid with PPP funds that were ultimately forgiven? Taxing the funds, boy, love to answer that another time. We have a little bit more time, but a good question regarding the taxability of funds that are not forgiven and so forth. Okay, continuing to cruise through here. My EIDL loan documents. Okay, now this is EIDL. We're talking PPP mostly today. My EIDL loan documents did not indicate paying off higher interest loans as a allowable use. The SBA showed that we could pay off higher interest loans prior to the application. Is this up to the bank? Well, I don't know. It's really with, I gotta know if you're talking about PPP or EIDL here. If it is the EIDL loan, the bank wasn't involved. So that was directly between you and SBA disaster. And if it was EIDL, you can actually pay on loans that were incurred before the disaster. So if you have notes payable, you can continue to make those out of your EIDL funds. And that is an allowable use of your EIDL funds. Now, if you're referring to PPP, PPP is not for paying off existing debt. The Payroll Protection Program is for 60% or higher use for payroll for your employees or payroll-related expenses. Is FTE consideration determined by number of employees or payroll amount less than 25%? It's basically the number of employees. So again, it's to take into consideration what, if you have 20 employees again that work, say this time, let's say 30 hours a week, that would be 30 divided by 40 at 0.75. And if you have 20 employees that are 0.75s, they're 15. That would be 15 total FTEs. So the minimum, and FTEs for part-timers can be done two ways. You can just count everybody as a half-time. So if they're working 5 hours a week, technically you can call them a 0.5 and a full-time employee a 0.10. But you can also go into, there are certain situations to where it's more advantageous, like if my example I just gave, if you have the 30-hour employee, rather than count them as a 0.5, they could be a 0.75. I know it's confusing. Kern Recovers gives COVID essential masks, gloves, sanitation wipes, and it's free. And you know, this is the first time we probably did not talk about the PPE program since, maybe May. Yeah, but yes, PPE is still being available through Kern Recovers, the Hispanic Chamber and others groups that are distributing those. Go to the Kern Recovers website and it's there. Also in Inyo and Mono counties. It's so easy to say that. Inyo and Mono counties, they also had free PPE programs available. And again, it's all under the design to keep our numbers down and to get our businesses open. State Fund is giving grant up to $10,000 for COVID expense supplies reimbursement. Did not know that. That's great to know. State Fund, workers' compensation. So used to saying unemployment compensation, but it's a workers' compensation fund. So that is the questions that I have for now. Let's move through. I did have one other poll, and I'm going to do it, even though I meant to do this a little bit earlier. Stick with me. I got one more poll. Okay, now that you've seen the PPP forgiveness form, which do you hope to use? Or which do you plan to use? Do you hope to use the easy, the long, or the new short? Very simple. And this is why all the polls happen at the very beginning, because if I try to wait till after I explain the differences between the three, I forget. So thank you though for sticking around and voting. And what you see on the screen is you see basically another poll, and we're going to look at that. So we've got 57% of you that are left that have voted, and that's a pretty good size sample. Thank you for sticking around. I'm going to end the poll right now, so thank you for voting and share it with you. And for those of you that are going to do that, it's the easy form and then the new S form. Look at that. Maybe 78% of you, 3 out of 4. Gotta love that. Almost 4 out of 5. We'll just go out 4 out of 5. 80-20 rule. Then 43% EZ, 35% S form, 18% don't know yet, and 5% long application. Okay, so next week, our special guest with us is going to be this fine gentleman, Kurt Friedman. And Kurt has got a great background. He's got some great tools to work with. Looking forward to talking about the 150 startup businesses he's working with. Works with our CSU or equivalent, the Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, SBDC, and Hot House. Great to have him on board next week. So that'll be next week, number 21. So hey, it's time to go. So thank you all for attending today. The surveys will be flying out. Let us know what you want to hear, see, and the direction you want to go. But thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly Bearden. We'll see you next week. Goodbye now.